Wondering what the F has happened to your body and your life? You're in the right place, my friend. Welcome to Season 3 of Transforming 45, where we dive into the incredible stories of how brilliant humans are navigating the midlife squeeze with courage, passion, and a healthy dose of humor. Don't miss out on any of our heart-led episodes. Hit the subscribe button, leave a 5-star review, and if you're inspired, share an episode you love with a friend. It means more to me than I can express that you're choosing to spend time here and sharing our message of midlife revolution. So let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Transforming 45. This week, I feel really grateful to have our guest. The world that we are living in is a very dynamic, constantly changing and evolving place. And hearing the stories of people who have lived through this kind of turmoil and the impact that it has on our lives is so important, because for those of us who are living in places like North America that feel really far away from conflict, it sometimes doesn't even feel like it's real. So hearing from lived realities, I think, is so important right now. And Anika has a whole life's worth of stories to tell. So I am so glad that you are here. Today, I have Anika Pavel, who was born Jarmila Kochverova in Czechoslovakia. What was intended as a one-year stay in England turned her into a refugee when the Soviet Union invaded her homeland, writing a bloody end to the Prague Spring. She received a crash course in life that took her from sleeping in a telephone booth at the Victoria Railway Station in London to waitressing to the lights of the fashion runway and on to magazine covers, even a James Bond appearance under the more pronounceable moniker Anika Pavel. When the lights had dimmed, she returned to her first love of writing. Anika, thank you so much for being here today, and welcome to Transforming 45.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, like I said earlier, it is so, now more than ever, it is so important that we share our stories so that we can really hear and feel what those lived realities actually were, because there is so much in our media landscape today that makes everything feel like there's this sort of veil over it, and we can pick and choose and decide what we believe is real and what isn't. And it's become a very complicated place. And so thank you for being here to share your story today, because it's so important that we hear the truth.
Right.
So Anika, tell me, who are you and how did life introduce you to this version?
Well, I was born in Czechoslovakia, which was then occupied by the communists. The government was communist. The country has since split into Czech Republic and Slovak Republic. And at the age of 18, I came to England as an au pair to learn to speak English. And then I, through many other tribulations, when the Soviet Union invaded Czechoslovakia in August of 1968, I became an immigrant. And I had to, from then on, fend for myself. I was very lucky because I have then won a competition to be a model. And from then on, I did always 2 jobs, the proverbial waitress at night and model at daytime. And, and that's how, the life has unfolded. I did not come to England to become a model. I came to England to learn to speak language. My goal was to become a journalist. But that all went upside down when the Soviet Union invaded Czechoslovakia and put a bloody end to Prague Spring.
Thank you for sharing that part of your story. And I always wonder what the experience is of sort of having a foot in two worlds, because even though you weren't present in Czechoslovakia while that was happening, it's your home, right? And watching or hearing about at the time what was happening while having to escape it and now living in England, how does that sort of juxtaposition, I want to say that sort of juxtaposition of realities, how does that impact the way you see the world around you?
Well, it was a very traumatic experience. It was horrifying to see the tanks in my homeland. And nobody knew how it was all going to, what the consequences of this invasion were going to be. And of course, they were what to be expected. The country became under communist regime again. And that's one of the reasons when Russia invaded Ukraine, it was déjà vu for me. And we were too small to fight the Soviet Union. Soviet Union was bigger. We were smaller. There was no chance. And so we just had to adjust. And so my parents were actually visiting me at the time. And they went back home because my mother was battling cancer. And my two brothers went back home. They were both studying English at university. And I stayed behind because I still had a visa. And I wanted to know how it was going to unfold.
Right.
So,
yeah. And so your family was back in Czechoslovakia?
correct.
Yeah. And that must be so difficult knowing that people that you love are in the midst of this conflict and really having no idea of what is going to unfold.
Yes, it's very difficult because it's out of your hands. Very little you can do about it.
Uh-huh.
Other
Absolutely.
than sending my brother's books and, Liverpool Football Cup scarves, something to cheer them up.
Yeah.
And, you know,
Yeah. And is there a time where you were able to be reunited with them?
eventually I did, yes. At some point, I was able to go back, and which made me very nervous. But when I first came back, I I was told you are being followed. Make no mistake about it. Be careful who you talk to, who you get together. But it didn't bother me too much because all I wanted to do is sit by my mother's side and be home with my parents. I certainly didn't, I wasn't what they were suspecting me. They thought, maybe I'm going to spy. But
right. Yeah, that's incredibly stressful when you're needing to be with your family and knowing that because you are living in another country that you could be accused of that, of spying or taking a so-called enemy action. And that is so terrifying. And so I wonder what you think about this narrative that seems to be writing itself that dictators aren't so bad.
oh, it's awful. They are terrible. As a child, I remember I lived through the fake trials of people who were supposed to be traitors, and it's just somebody didn't like somebody, and they were in power, and they were able to fabricate documents, and it really haunts me till this day. I really get goosebumps when I hear. It really affects me that people don't tell the truth, because I know that when you don't tell the truth, where it can end up. It may start not so harmful. People might shrug it off from one shoulder to another, but as time goes by, this can grow, and it's terrifying.
Uh-huh. And I wonder, I mean, we don't really know the answer to this question, but I mean, those of us who have lived in North America for all our lives and have watched this history don't understand what it is to live in a place where there isn't freedom. And so there's this, segments of this population who think, well, life is really hard. The world is complicated, and I just don't want to have to think about anything. I want someone just to tell me how it's going to be and what's going to happen. And what are the pitfalls you observed when that is the style of leadership?
That's very dangerous. Very dangerous. I mean, now in Hungary, they actually are saying that the counter-revolution in 1956 wasn't really that bad. I was there. I lived through it. It was absolute horror. Children were used, to put on the tanks. It was horrible. It haunted me for a very long time. Because I was just that age, that what they were doing to the children of my age. And I think it's awful.
Uh-huh. And that's why telling stories is so important, right? Because when you read it in a history book, it doesn't have the same kind of impact as it does when you hear it from someone who has actually lived that. And the other important thing I think that people need to remember is that the intention of a dictatorship is power.
Precisely.
It is not right. It is not the well-being of the people. It is not in support of the people. It is entirely about holding power for one person.
Right.
And when one person holds that kind of absolute power, it is destructive on all levels.
Exactly. That's why we got rid of kings.
Right.
I mean, even the king in England has really no power, essentially. It's the country's run by the government. It's the head of the state, but only figure. But I do get terrified at this. Viktor Orban just put the goosebumps on me.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's terrifying. And then when you hear, political candidates in the United States, and I am Canadian, and yet I'm very clued into what is happening in my neighboring country because there are global ramifications to that election. And when we watch the conflict increasing in the Middle East, that it looks like it is becoming a regional conflict at this point. There is so much at stake globally, and we have a candidate in that country who is praising Viktor Orban.
Yes, that really puts the shivers down my spine.
Yes. And it is that search for power and power over.
Yeah, what is most ironic about it? That he married two women who are from those countries.
Yes.
Who were abused by authoritarian regimes.
Uh-huh.
Yes. That's what makes it, for me, incredibly ironic.
It is very ironic, and it also puts it in an even darker light.
Exactly. It's funny, nobody picked on it. Maybe because I'm from one of the people from those countries. That's why I picked on it very quickly. And I'm like, why is it that nobody points that out?
Yeah, absolutely. That he has, an alleged partnership with people who have experienced that kind of oppression. And in knowing that and the harm that it can do, just continues down that road. It is terrifying to me as well.
Yeah. I mean, my children know all about it. I wrote to them, one of the one of the reasons why I wrote a book, because my children wanted to know my background, and I go back to history. It's also about Second World War and even prior to that, the history of the tiny little country. And so I have to be thinking that these stories must have been told by, the first wife, who is in fact my age. It's strangely enough, my life was very parallel to her, because she graduated from high school same time as I did, went also away the same time I did, was a model same time as I did. And I just know that these stories had to be told. And so what I'm most disappointed is the children. I mean, my children don't feel that way.
Uh-huh. And what you just said about telling your story so personally to your own children, that so many young people feel so far away from any of those conflicts at this
Right.
point that it doesn't, like I said earlier, it just doesn't even seem real to them. And if they don't have people in their lives who are looking them in the face and telling them this is what happened, it's also that complex intersection of what's happened with social media, right? It's not the same. And, this podcast is still part of the social media world, but I do like the longer form of it, that it can be more nuanced, and you do feel like you get to know the people who are having this conversation a little bit more than just a 30-second snippet that you watch. But it is
So I
not the
think
same.
yeah, I also
Sorry, go
think
ahead.
that with a podcast, you see the person, you see their face, you see how they act, but the words can take everything. The paper can carry a lot.
Yes, absolutely. And that connects to what I was going to say too. It's very different than sitting in a room with someone face to face and having those conversations where you're having actual human interactions. And in podcasting, I do kind of feel like that. The screen, it's still not quite the same, but it is a little bit more. But when I was an educator, there's an author, Eva Olson, out of Canada, who was a Holocaust survivor. And she has written a number of really powerful books, some for children. And she would come to school, and we would have an assembly, and she would tell her story to the children. And it makes me emotional even now, remembering what that was, to sit in a room full of children and watch their reactions as she told her story. And you can't disconnect from that kind of human emotion when someone is right there. It's really hard to deny someone's story when they are right in front of you, and you can see written all over their body in all of the ways that we communicate with other than words, that
Right.
makes it really hard to deny that is the truth of their lived experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you have all of these children who are building this empathetic, really beautiful relationship with someone who is sharing their story. And that is how we as humans, that's how we connect with each other.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So how did that become the fuel for your book?
Well, yeah, exactly. I always was a storyteller, but at some point when I started to speak English, I've lost the ability to write in my own language. And I thought for a while that I wasn't going to be able to write ever again. And then I got married and had children. And then children, I always used to say, correct me. At the beginning, they were kind of little facetious and like enjoyed just to correct mama. But as they grew older, it was much more genuine. And then when I started to write the first stories, it was my son who said, this is pretty good, but you need to go to school. And so I did. And so I went to school, and I took several classes online. And I went to NYU further education. And I really learned and started to write more. And then eventually my book started to get, my essay started to get published. And so as the children read it, they just wanted me to write more and more about, the past, about their family members. And they wanted to know their roots, where they came from. So they don't have to go and pay somebody on the internet to find out their
Right.
roots. Say, tell us about it.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I would go back in my history and write to them about their uncle and about my father and my grandmother. And but it kind of developed as essays. And so then I put it together sort of chronologically. And although each essay can stand on its own, it still somewhat follows. So it's easy to read and easy to put down, and you get reminded what is going on. And so, it was a real encouragement from my children how it came about. And of course, it helps that it got nominated for Pushcart Prize, and so that was a big honor. And so, by the way, my book has been selected as distinguished favorite by the New York City Big Book Award. So
Congratulations. That is very exciting.
yeah, so that's exciting. So
Yes.
I'm just thrilled also that people are reading the book, and I wish people more in America would read it, and it would be more available or more out there, because especially now, I think that I have so much to say,
You
and
do.
just really to tell people, look, this is what happens if you don't care.
Yes, this is what happens if you don't care. And that it really is, I think you just summed up the time that we are in, right? That we are so distracted by things that don't matter, that we don't have the space for the things that do.
Right.
And being engaged and knowing. And I think another element of it is there's this deep sense of powerlessness. Like it doesn't
Right.
matter what I do because it's not going to have an impact on anything anyway. And I'm wondering how or if writing this book helped you to reconnect with your power and how much power you do have to make an impact in the world.
Well, I like to think that a lot of people will read the book because, as I said, especially now, we were a tiny little country, a dot in the middle of the Europe, and yet we stood up to the mighty Soviets and carved our own journey, and little by little we have came from under the yoke, and you can't ignore each other. And there is one of the stories how the people talked to the soldiers who came to Czechoslovakia, and a lot of those guys didn't even know where they were. It's a power of a big nation that can mobilize people who they have a power over, and that should not be.
Absolutely. And it's so similar to what we're seeing play out between Russia and the Ukraine at this point.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Where no one thought the Ukraine would be able to stand for this long. We're, well over 2.5 years into this conflict, and it is awful and it is horrific, and it does show what happens when you do stand up to a power. Yes.
And I can tell you that anybody thinks for a split second that if Russia took Ukraine, that's where it stops. No. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania will be next. Putin pretty much already got Belarus, and then will be Slovakia, Poland, Moldova.
Yes. Yeah. There is an obvious plan, right?
Right.
And I'm sure Putin thought that he was going to be much further down that plan by now
Right.
than he is, because of the world standing up and saying, and was supporting the Ukraine and saying, no, we are going to support what is right and what is in the best interest of people, and not what is in the best interest of
He
power.
wants to restore the old Soviet Union. That's what he wants.
Yeah.
People are not willing to go backwards. And that's what I'm hoping for in US, that people will not go backwards. But I have a faith.
Yes, I do too. I'm also holding the faith over here for moving forward. You have such distinct, sort of chapters in your life, right? So there's your early life in Czechoslovakia, being an immigrant, and then moving into the fashion and entertainment worlds. And I'm wondering what that experience was like, from that immigrant perspective to being in the world of entertainment.
But it was really great. And for me, at the beginning, when I started to model, the most exciting thing was that I could travel. Because one thing that we could never do in Czechoslovakia is to travel. So, when I first came to England, I couldn't afford to go anywhere. So to be paid to travel, which that just really was something that I loved. And
Yeah.
so, I never really thought of myself as somebody famous. I was just thrilled that I was able to make money, and it was fun. I made a lot of friends, and I could travel and could do what I wanted to do, help my parents. So that was very exciting. And until I met my American husband, and then we went to Hong Kong, and I kind of started to build a family. That was a next chapter, that chapter of modeling and little glamour and the movies and TV and, seeing I remember first time I saw myself on a cover of a magazine, I walked past and I went, it was kind of quite jarring.
Yeah.
And, and thrilling. Of course, my mother would go to every neighbor had to go and see it. But then I traveled and I became a mother, and that was the next total different chapter. So living in Hong Kong was great for me because I was there twice on a modeling assignment, and I loved being there. And then I came to Boston and Monte Carlo, and then eventually to New Jersey, and I became really a full-time mother. And I what with three children, you are busy, and they all did sports. My boys played hockey, my daughter was a swimmer, and I became an official. So I took the course, but still there was enough time. I did I raised money for children with cancer, for Jersey battered women, and for brain tumor. As the children started to get older, I had more and more time, and then eventually, when my last one went to college, I moved to New York City. And that's when I went to school and started to write. So it was like I had a kind of quite a distinguished, you could almost cut it where, in my life, how my life was divided. And so I look forward to having that time to be able to write and love every minute of it.
Does writing help you reconnect with like the truth of who you are, right? Because you've played so many roles, right? Both within the entertainment world, within being a mother, being an official and a fundraiser, and they're important parts of us, but they are roles that we play. And writing requires us to really go internal, right? And find what our voice is. And what was that process like for you in writing this book?
Yes, that was really, it was a big revelation to me when I suddenly realized that now I could be anonymous. And then I realized, wait a minute, I'm hanging out my laundry here. This is my life I'm writing about. And that took a little while, but I decided that I have to be honest. And so there were parts that were hard to write, but eventually I did it. First, I have to admit I wrote the easy parts, and then that that are easier to think that you are proud of and things that you can easily follow. But then I had to dig deeper, and eventually, little by little, I wrote about things that happened to me that were not as pleasant. And because if you want, the reader will know you are lying.
Uh-huh.
So if you want to connect with the reader, you have to be honest.
Yeah, because there's a change in the tone of the voice when it's not grounded in truth.
Right.
And I'm also wondering, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, when you are writing your story, you're writing it from your own perspective.
Right.
And there are other characters in the story.
Right.
How does writing and thinking about the other character's perspective, how does that change, or does it change the way you remember things? Does it change the way you feel about it or how you experience it when you're also trying to think about it from someone else's lens?
I always try to be very honest, and I put it more into perspective what I saw. For example, my grandmother, I would write of how I saw it, what she was like, what she was thinking, and I would, as long as I could, I would relate it in a dialogue. Like if she has a dialogue with my father, I would write the dialogue and let the reader take the picture of what was going on.
Yeah.
Now, there were some people that are no longer alive, and I have to imagine. But most of the times, these people would tell me the story. For example, one of the essays is my cousin who went to Korea told me a story. And that pretty much is his words, what I have written. And my uncle Pavel, who worked in underground during the Second World War, he told me the stories, and I tried to put it as faithfully on a paper as I could.
Yeah, and there's a real calling in that, in sharing not only your story, but sharing the story of other people in a way that is true and authentic to them and still makes that real connection with the audience or with your reader.
Yes. I tried to even imitate my cousin's accent, the way he spoke, because he told me the story, and I tried to use as much as possible his words.
Yeah.
And I think it's visible in that particular story that was not me. That's not how I wrote. That's not how I speak.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I think is so interesting when I'm reading a book that has such distinct characters in it and that do have their own speech patterns, and how interesting it must be, like a social experiment it sort of must be as the author to sit in the life of someone else, right? To try to take that on and then express it out to the reader.
Right. Yes. It's a challenge, but it's also joy, especially when you read it back to yourself and you think, yeah, I think I got it.
Yeah. That's so great. What did you find most impactful about the process of writing this book?
It's remembering situations that I may have put in the back of my mind. That often shook me up and made me realize that I have all those years, I never really thought about it. And suddenly I did. When I write about when I ended up spending a night at a Victoria station, I really I lived it again. I lived it again, and yet at the time, you go through it, and then I never went back to it. I never thought about it. I just put it at the back of my head, and it was kind of interesting for me to revisit some of those situations that I had to come across.
Yeah. And with the benefit of time and lived experience, being able to look back and seeing how those were foundational moments to your story and where you got to.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I mean, there were few stories I was like, when I finished, I was like, God, I can't believe I did that.
Yeah. And a beautiful legacy, right? To also be able to leave for your children and leave to the
Yes.
world of, this is possible. This is what you can do when
Right,
you believe in yourself.
right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I still sometimes don't believe it that somebody with my accent, i- i- you know, is able to write a book. Um, but writing and speaking is very different.
It is different. And I was saying to you earlier, so my life before what I do now, I was an educator and I worked with kids who speak multiple languages. And the research shows that humans who speak multiple languages outperform their monolinguistic peers in all areas. And I really think I've observed when you speak multiple languages, you are able to look at life through multiple lenses and really draw from those, because language is more than just words. It's a
Right,
way of, right? It's a way of experiencing the world. Like, I'm sure when you speak in your home language, the way you express yourself is quite different from the way that you express yourself in English,
right. Yes,
right? And
it is. It
yeah.
is.
And so when you have all of those tools at your disposal, I almost would think that would make for a richer experience in
Yes,
how you are able
absolutely.
to write.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, even we all had to learn speak Russian, and even we didn't want to learn it. We did, and not that I remember that much of it, but like if I read something, I I I comprehend it better. You
Hmm.
know, like something about Russia or anything. It's you get you get it.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And what are you hoping that readers will take away from your book and from your story?
I hope the reader will see that if you are positive and you work hard, you can achieve whatever you set your mind to achieve. Um, None of what I did was terribly easy, but I have always been optimistic person, and you don't always get 100% what you want. But the worst thing is not to try. The worst thing is when you have to say to yourself, "Ugh, I wish I tried." That's not a good feeling.
Mhm.
So, so if you want to do something, do it.
Yeah.
When I was 18 and I was wanted to go to England, most people in my town thought I was crazy because nobody left. And
Mhm.
unbeknownst to all of us, there was the undercurrent of the Dubček coming into power and allowing people to travel. So I came to England.
Yeah. And that is a message that we need at this juncture in time more than ever. So
Yes.
thank you so much for being here and sharing your story with us today. Um, Listeners, how to purchase Anika's book An Encounter with the Future will be in the show notes. So make sure you pick that up and read it and really make the connections between what has happened and what is happening now and how we can all move forward in a better way. So,
right. And it's not that far, not that different, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here today.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for being part of the Transforming 45 community. Your support means the world to us. Stay tuned for more juicy episodes, and remember to keep showing up to your life with the love and magic you deserve. Until next time.